I can't be the only one who is hoping that Gen 9 will be announced for release at the end of next year, right? Like, we just had Legends Arceus, and that game was such a leap in terms of mechanics and open world design for the Pokemon franchise that I thought they'd at least let us sit with it for a while. But apparently that 3-year generational cycle is too important, so they're just rushing out Scarlet and Violet for the end of this year. Or at least you'd think they were rushing it out. But I've done some research, and now not only do I not think these games are rushed, but instead they may have actually had one of the longest production cycles in Pokemon's history, stretching all the way back to 2016. I think these games were initially put into production alongside Sword and Shield. I think we might be about to see the culmination of 6 years worth of work from GameFreak's most senior design team come to light. And it's going to have a lot more in common with Legends Arceus than we may have initially believed. I'm Captain Fidget, and this is why it's not too soon for Gen 9. Let's talk about GameFreak for a second. It's no secret that as a company, they have very few members of staff when compared to their competitors. And this is often attributed to as the reason why their games feel like they lack the polish of other titles. The thing is, that's just how they like to run things. Junichi Masuda has said himself that he prefers working in a smaller team because it makes it much easier to communicate and get ideas across to everyone efficiently. Too many cooks spoil the broth and all that. He's not wrong either. In an interview with Eurogamer, Eiji Aonuma, producer of Breath of the Wild, said,
"One of the major problems we faced on a game of this size was actually coordinating everything. And by that, I mean creating this huge open world by lots of development staff."
And lest we forget, Junichi Masuda is a man who helped build Pokemon Red and Green with a team only of around 20 people. The guy knows a thing or two about getting results out of a small team. Of course, the problem is that Red and Green were programmed on a 2MB cartridge, about the same size as a modern day selfie. That, and the game took the team 6 years to produce, nearly bankrupting the company in the process. Games today, built for modern hardware, just aren't as forgiving. Sure, an indie team can whip up a pixel art masterpiece, but for a AAA 3D game, it requires a lot more people. And Game Freak still likes to run their company as though they were an indie developer and not like they're working on one of the largest gaming franchises the world has ever seen. You may have heard of Game Freak's Gear Project. It's basically a way for employees at the company to come together to build something new, something other than Pokemon. It gives developers a nice break from what I have to assume is the monotony of pumping out the next iteration of the same series over and over again, but also allows them to experiment with new mechanics or ideas that they may have, allowing them to bring that knowledge and experience back to the next Pokemon game they work on.
Gear Project has helped me become more creative. I've now seen the whole process of creation all the way to marketing and selling the game to players. I can now bring that know-how back to the Pokemon team and try to create something different for Pokemon.
These games often get started by just a handful of team members coming together on a singular idea with the drive and motivation to see it through. It's also not uncommon for people working on these games to also be working on other projects, like Pokemon, simultaneously. So what's any of this got to do with Pokemon Scarlet and Violet? Well, this is where we step into the realms of speculation. You see, Game Freak have their staff on a pretty tight leash when it comes to interviews in order to avoid leaks. So actual information about game development, ongoing or otherwise, is few and far between. But here's my theory as to what went down based on my findings, and you can find my sources as well as further readings in the description. Not long after the release of Sun and Moon in 2016, rumors began to circulate of a sequel game being brought to the Switch, codenamed Pokemon Stars. Now, this was obviously never actually released to the public, and instead we got the 3DS games Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. But the sources for Eurogamer, who first stated that we would see Switch sequels, must have seen something. It's thought that the source may have merely seen a test of what the games would have been like were they to run on the Switch, and that was all. But it means that Game Freak were working on bringing Pokemon to the Switch since 2016. We also know this to be true thanks to an interview with Junichi Masuda himself in July of 2018, who stated that Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee had been in production for 2 years at that point. Not to mention that this was also not the mainline Switch title announced the year previously at E3 in 2017. That turned out to be Sword and Shield, so it would appear that both the Let's Go and Gen 8 games went into production shortly after the release of Sun and Moon.
Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Pokemon Let's Go Eevee were developed at the same time as Pokemon Sword and Pokemon Shield, and the two teams collaborated heavily.
But here's the real speculation bit. The other main attributing factor to Pokemon games suffering in quality is the quick turnaround time they're forced to have in order to keep the Pokemon franchise at large moving forward. If the senior members of GameFreak wanted to make a splash with a Switch title, to really bring Pokemon into the modern era and step away from its formulaic nature, which remember, they've already started trying to do with Sun and Moon, having removed gyms in that game, then that's going to take time. A lot of time. And it will take a dedicated team of experienced designers to work on it alongside their other obligations.
There are certainly plenty of other mechanics that would be difficult to change, I'd guess. But if we as developers don't actively confront those kinds of challenges, the series' gameplay would become fixed and stale, wouldn't it? So to prevent that staleness, I'd like to keep proposing new ways of play without any reservations.
I think the senior members of GameFreak had already started planning the next big step for Pokemon, an open world adventure with all new catching mechanics. So they handed off the games that would be used for Generation 8 to a junior team. A team who would bring enthusiasm and drive to the project and would be comfortable sticking to a standardized Pokemon formula.
Iwao says that one of the most important themes during the development of Sword and Shield was the generational shift among staff. He gave higher positions to the younger staff members who had the ability and motivation to take on the responsibility, which gave them opportunities to grow and learn.
Meanwhile, the higher-ups in the company could focus on this new aspiration. Unfortunately for them, Pokemon Go was a huge success. As such, I think GameFreak were not forced, but perhaps strongly encouraged to make a game that capitalized on that success. It was still far too early to try to bring this idea of an open world adventure to fruition, so instead they would make a game that included some aspects of their vision, only more simplified. So we got Pokemon in the Wild, a variety of rideable Pokemon, and new catching mechanics, but in a remake of Pokemon Yellow, so that little to no resources had to be given to world building, story, or Pokemon design.
Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Pokemon Let's Go Eevee were our first full Pokemon game projects that we developed on the Nintendo Switch. And it was almost sort of a research project for us to learn how to develop on that system.
I also think the catching mechanics were a little more inspired by Pokemon Go than Game Freak may have wanted for their final project, but that couldn't be helped for this one. With that out of the way, they could continue working on their ambitious project in full. Presumably, it was always in the works in the background, and thanks to the junior team pulling through with Sword and Shield, some critics even claiming it to be the best Pokemon game ever, and sales figures looking very promising, their gamble to hand the game down to them paid off. Work would continue on their open world project, with a new catching mechanic implemented to replace the one from Let's Go that would allow players to have a choice to either enter battle with wild Pokemon or simply try to catch them from afar. Things were going well, and the project looked like it could make for a great Gen 9 game. Then the discussion of Diamond and Pearl remakes came up. Again, remember, this is best guess here given the information we have available. I believe that when asked to do a remake for Diamond and Pearl, Game Freak proposed to do it in the style they'd been developing. There was some hesitancy from Nintendo and the Pokemon Company, who on the whole would prefer the franchise to continue using the proven money printing formula, so they suggested outsourcing a faithful remake to release alongside this experimental game. And Game Freak chomped at the bit. They had their chance. This was going to revolutionize the franchise forever. Only one problem. Their entire build up to this point was in a region based off of Spain and Portugal. There was nothing built for a Sinnoh remake. They would need to redesign the entire region from scratch. How would they integrate the cities and the towns and the gyms? But that's the thing. You don't. You said it in the past. Before gyms, before cities, before most people even have Pokemon, strip the whole experience down to what they already had. An open world experience with a damn fun catching mechanic. Maybe throw in a battle gimmick, because apparently every Pokemon game needs one of those now. So effectively, Legends Arceus is the beta test for what Gen 9 is going to be. A game built off of the back of a small team of experienced developers desperate to breathe some life into the franchise. I can't see any other way that these games could be released so close to each other. And despite the fact that I don't think Game Freak are as incompetent or incapable as others may suggest, I would be very surprised if they were able to pull off something as unique to the franchise as Legends Arceus in the same amount of time as it's taken them to produce their more iterative games previously. Maybe my timescale is a bit off, and hey, maybe Junichi Masuda really did just want to make a game based on Pokemon Go one day. But as stated previously, this has never, nor likely will ever be confirmed directly by anyone at GameFreak, or Nintendo, or the Pokemon Company. So I guess it's just a theory. Let me know in the comments if you think I'm right, or have your own ideas on when Scarlet and Violet first went into production. Leave a like if you haven't already, and subscribe for more theories and speculative videos, because that's going to do it for today, guys. Thank you very much for watching. We hope you enjoyed it, and we hope to join us again on the next one. But until then, I'll catch you later. Be sure to subscribe, like, comment, ring the bell, do all the YouTube things, and I shall see you on the next episode.